Everyone's there just straightening up.
Okay, we're recording.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our second Empower Period podcast. So today, our podcast is called Menstruation in the Media, and we've got some really fantastic guests, so thank you all so much for coming. And they're going to introduce themselves in a second. But firstly, my name's Akushla, and I'm from iRise International. I'm the advocacy coordinator, and I'm leading the Empower Period project, which is hoping to inspire young people to work to end period shame in their communities across the UK to try and hit the government's task of ending period poverty by 2025. So yeah, I hope that you really enjoy it, and these guys are going to introduce themselves now. So Maria Tomlinson, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Hi everybody, it's great to be back on the Empower Period podcast. So I'm a researcher from the University of Sheffield. I'm in the Department of Journalism Studies, so obviously very relevant to media. And I'm doing a 3-year project about representations of periods in the media, and I'm focusing particularly on challenging stigma and tackling period poverty. And my project is funded by the fantastic Leverhulme Trust, who I know it's very important to name check. And thank you for them for their support of my project. And yeah, today I'm here to talk a bit about what I've learned from my research about period stigma and the media. So thank you again for having me, Akushla. I'm excited again to co-host this podcast.
Great. And then Sophia Liu, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, good morning. I'm Sophia. I'm one of the graphic designers in the room and the person behind the Everybody Bleeds project. And actually, this is so relevant because I woke up this morning and I was on my period. So I was like, I'm brand, I'm ready.
It's fate.
Exactly.
Amazing. And then, so we have the amazing women from the Red Cloud project. I don't know who wants to go first to introduce yourself.
I'll start. So hi, my name is Maria, and I am the Design and Outreach Officer at Child Rights International Network. And all four of us, so with Bristy, Safia and Anna, we run Ricebox Studio, which is currently doing the fellowship at Child Rights International Network on a period education campaign called the Red Cloud Project.
Amazing.
Next.
Hi, so I'm Bristy. I'm also part of the Ricebox Studio and Red Cloud Project. I'm currently working as a campaign officer for MAR, which is the Maternal Aid Association.
Hello, I'm Sophia. So aside from Red Cloud Project and Ricebox, I'm also a design developer at Shades of Noir.
Hi, my name is Anna, and I'm currently studying a master's in creative computing at University of the Arts London, and I'm also 1/4 of Ricebox Studio and the Red Cloud Project.
Amazing, thank you so much. So you can see we've got like an array of people here today, so hopefully we won't end up talking over each other too much, but forgive us if we do, because we can get a bit excited sometimes. So I think we should just go straight into it. Basically what we want to talk about today is taboo and stigma. So Maria, do you want to kind of give us a bit of a background into sort of menstruation in the media, what you've done with it, the presence of taboo and stigma within that, and also actually what do you define as media? That would be quite a good thing to establish first.
What do we define as media?
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so I suppose in my research I kind of split media into two parts. One part is traditional media, so newspapers, magazines, broadcasts, and the other side is social media, and I look at both. Basically in my project, and I'm still at the very beginning of my research, but I've been analysing a lot of magazines, and I've been looking at the language they use to talk about periods, and I've started to notice that the language in magazines is changing. Women's magazines are even more kind of like open about periods than they have been in the past, using a lot more kind of like plain language, like, so for example, talking about menstruation rather than euphemisms like aunt Flo. And they've even included lots of examples of activism that's been going on in the media recently. So basically, if we take it back to the theme of a stigma, so the word stigma is something that refers to kind of a stain or a mark on somebody. And it's the idea that that renders someone kind of defective in the eyes of society. And what this has to do with periods is that periods have been a stigmatized subject for thousands of years, and it's a subject that's been traditionally surrounded by taboo. And by that, it means a subject that people really are expected not to talk about. And there's still kind of that stigma today. So a lot of anthropologists have looked into why the stigma exists, and they've traced it back thousands of years to religious texts that position menstruating women as unclean and impure. But of course, we can argue that those ideas kind of reflected patriarchal attitudes at the time. And feminists have done a lot of work about this, and they say that the reason that there's such stigma around periods is because of patriarchy, which is the idea that men are dominant in society and women are in an inferior position. So the kind of negative terms that we hear around periods are rooted in patriarchy. So we think of ideas such as periods being gross, or women on their periods being moody or hysterical. The word hysterical is a great example of a patriarchal term, because it's very Freudian. It comes from the idea that women are crazy because their wombs move around their bodies. So this shows a very kind of like masculine patriarchal idea about periods. And the stigma is evident in the fact that it's a taboo subject. So if you think, for example, about going to the bathroom to change your tampon, and now you see young girls wanting to like hide their tampons like under their sleeve, and that's an idea of stigma. It's the fact that you don't want people to know that you're on your period, because our society expects us to conceal it and not talk about it. So euphemisms, for example, are evidence of stigma, because you don't want to say the word menstruation, so you say Aunt Flo, or like being on your rag, or something like that. So if we refer this back to the media, we can see that traditionally the media has reinforced these ideas of stigma and taboo. So I think the clearest example we can look at is advertisements. So the blue liquid, for example, that has been traditionally in a lot of adverts, it's implying that periods are dirty because we don't want to represent a red liquid because that's too close to period blood. And of course, talking about sanitary products, feminine hygiene, that reinforces the stigma because it implies that menstruating people are dirty. But thankfully, in recent campaigns, we've seen a bit more use of red blood, and that's kind of helping to challenge stigma. So that's advertisement. And of course, in popular culture, if we think about TV shows, menstruating women are often the subject of jokes. You know, they're portrayed as irrational often, and weak and pathetic, and this is all for comedic reasons. So again, that reinforces the stigma around periods. But thankfully, the past few years, we've really seen the narrative start to change. So in 2015, a lot of menstrual activism became really visible in the media. So we had Rupi Kaur, who posted a picture of herself on Instagram, and she had a little spot of menstrual blood on her pajamas and another one on the bed. And Instagram actually took this photograph down because they said it violated their terms and conditions. And yet it wasn't violent, it wasn't nudity. So she put it back up again, and I think it was taken down for a second time before Rupi actually went onto her Facebook page and said, right, I just wanted to post a simple picture of an experience a lot of women have, and Instagram took it down twice. So this really shows that there is still a lot of stigma around periods, and she got a lot of media attention in magazines and newspapers for that too. And then of course we had Kieran Gandhi, who is a musician from the US. She ran the London Marathon without wearing a pad or a tampon. And I think she woke up on the morning of the marathon and said to herself, I'd feel much more comfortable not wearing a menstrual product today. So I think I'll run without one and raise awareness of period poverty, but also kind of challenge the stigma. And there's just some of the examples from 2015. As well, there's been a lot of hashtag movements on social media since then. So one of them was hashtag live tweet your period, which was I think started late 2014, and it was started by someone from BuzzFeed, I think. And it encouraged people to share stories about their periods on social media to kind of break the taboo. And then finally, it's really important to mention, which support I'm going to always come back to, the importance of inclusivity. So we've seen some fantastic work on social media over the past few years to raise awareness that not only women menstruate, and it's important to include trans and non-binary people in conversations about periods. So we had Cass Clemmer, who posted a picture of themselves on social media with the hashtag bleeding whilst trans. And of course, recently I had the pleasure of speaking to the wonderful Kenny Ethan Jones about the fantastic work he's doing to raise awareness. So he was actually he was the very first man to be in a period product advert. And now he's just looking to kind of spread the word, and he's very keen to change the language around periods to be more inclusive.
Amazing.
Yeah, I think that's the quickest summary I can do of the situation.
That was amazing. Thank you. I feel like I just learned so much within the last 5 minutes. Yeah, and I think just to add to that, I think I'd like to say what we mentioned on our last podcast as well, in that when we're talking about this kind of rise of advocacy and awareness around period poverty, we're very much talking about it within kind of a UK and Western perspective. So we feel like it's really important to put out that there's been some incredible period poverty advocacy work, for example, in East Africa, where iRise works for decades, and they have very much been championing this cause. It's very much kind of a more sort of a white Western culture that's only just coming into the UK and America. So I really like to put that out there and remind people, because I get a lot of questions sometimes where people are like, oh, what can we do to help them? And it's very much not that at all. That narrative is incredibly derogatory and negative, and it's just untrue. If anything, we are learning from them. Like, I don't like to separate, but like we very much need to sort of catch up. And for example, I said last time, the Ugandan government, they have put free period products in schools since 2014. That has been an initiative for the last 6 years. And obviously that's only just come into play in the UK. So I think it's really important to kind of keep that in mind, that if anything, we're new onto the scene. And yeah, just to put that in there. But thank you so much. That was so informative.
Yeah, thank you for adding that. I was going to go back to the, as a post-colonial scholar myself, I was going to go back to the neo-colonialist angle on that, but I thought, I mentioned that last time, so I'm not going to bore everyone listening again. But it's a really great point to bring up all the fantastic work that's gone on in East Africa over the past few years.
Yeah, and I think also when you were talking about stigma, I think it's important to remember that not only is the danger with stigma the feeling of losing self-confidence and self-esteem and feeling like you're not worthy and not good enough, but also the physical complications that can come with that as well, the medical complications. For example, if you don't know what's normal for you, then how are you supposed to know what's not normal for you? And then how are you supposed to go to the doctor and say, I think this isn't right? And how are girls and women and people with periods supposed to speak up and say, oh, I have this issue, I am experiencing this, but I don't know if it's okay, if we're not even allowed to talk about it.
Absolutely.
So there's that kind of side to stigma as well. Did any of you guys want to chip in on that at all?
To what you're saying, Kushla, about raising awareness of PCOS and endometriosis, I've noticed that women's magazines over the past 2 years have started to write more about those and telling women, you should go to the doctor if you think, and they write articles like what is normal, what's not normal. I don't really like the terms normal and abnormal, because again, it kind of brings the idea of stigma. But magazines have got better. And also, of course, the other side of activism we haven't spoken about is the environmental activism around periods, in terms of encouraging people to use reusable products. And as we specified on the last podcast, that they aren't appropriate for everybody, but for people that can use reusable products, that's fantastic.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think to echo slightly what you're both saying is, like, as much as there's these amazing movements going on, and there's the whole body form, blood normal movement and all of that kind of thing, like the fact that those kinds of campaigns are still met with such controversy just goes to show there's still a long way to go. And it's fantastic that we're all getting in and pitching and having this conversation, but ultimately as well, there are a lot of people who still do succumb to these stigmas, and this is why it's so important to have these kinds of podcasts to talk about how we can make these conversations just more every day, really.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And I think leading into that, I would love, Sophia, if you'd like to talk about your Everybody Bleeds video. If anyone hasn't seen it, then go and see it. It's available online. It's on our Instagram live page as well. And it was basically a fantastic video that you produced to kind of tackle stigma and taboo through the presence of blood. I'll let you take it away. You go ahead and talk about it.
Thanks, Akushla. I run a health design studio of my friend, and basically we raise awareness about health inequalities. And it was really interesting to research this because obviously the term menstrual health comes up a lot, and it's something that literally affects about half of the world's population. And just as Maria was talking, I was thinking about examples in my own life where I've experienced like menstrual stigmas and not even realized it. So even at school, I went to an all-girls school, and when you wanted to go like skip lessons, you'd walk around and like have a tampon up your sleeve, and if a male teacher like told you why you out of class, you just whip one out and be like, oh my goodness. So it's like learning to use that taboo and like turn it on its head, but again, not even realizing that it was a taboo because these things were so normalized when we were younger. And then even going to work, I actually worked at a media company for a couple of months. And I remember I was like the only woman in the team. And every time I was on my period, I always just remember thinking, oh, the toilet's right there, but my pads are right there. But I still wouldn't feel comfortable to just pick one up and go to the toilet. Why is that? And this was around the time where I started thinking about this movement a bit more heavily. And I'm mixed race. I'm half Vietnamese, half English, Irish. And I found it really interesting, especially bringing up what you said, Akushla, about different cultures and their opinions to menstruation, how my Vietnamese granddad would like be like, oh, you can have a bit of extra meat today because you're on your period, and do you want some tea and stuff like that, and actually really engaging in that conversation. And it's a conversation I wouldn't ever have with one on my other side of the family. So it's really interesting to see that that line. So I looked a lot into existing campaigns at that time, and where I felt like the conversation could really steer a bit more was the fact that conversations about menstruation had become so gendered, and blood itself is a non-gendered construct. Like, everybody has blood. And I felt that a lot of the time when you're dealing with stigmas for everything, not just with menstruation, but it's much harder to try and change the minds of the people who don't have that experience. And we talk a lot about trans men, non-binary people who also have periods. It's not just a women only issue, but there's a lot of cis men who don't have periods, and it can be really difficult to engage in that conversation or even like find the courage to bring it up, especially if it's something which ultimately you could assume, oh, doesn't affect their lives, but actually it does, because everybody has somebody who bleeds in their circle. So I really thought about how I was going to do this, and I realized actually blood itself is the metaphor. And so all it is is a really simple idea. It's just plasters, but they're shaped like sanitary pads. And the whole idea of that is because if you wear one, and a lot of people will want a plaster, when you take one off, you can see the sort of streak of blood. And that's exactly what a pad looks like. And I remember that moment because I was at the dining table doing a prototype for them. And then my brother and his mates were walking down the stairs, and then they saw it. And they were like, oh, that's really funny. I'd wear that. And the minute I heard him say that, unprompted, I was like, okay, I'm onto something. And then built it up as a campaign, talks about how we could normalize blood in this way. And yeah, it really hit off.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sophia. I'm picking up on that as well. The fact that kind of like emphasizes what you're saying. The fact that we are so used to seeing blood in horror films, and that's acceptable in society. Whereas period blood, which is innocuous, is something that needs to remain hidden.
Yeah.
So as well, to the point where, like, I remember being at school and learning at periods, and then being at school when I had my first period, and I'm sure we'll get onto this topic later, but being so confused because the blood does brown a bit, and you're like, oh my god, like, blood here. It's really interesting how images which are used to teach about periods are in themselves like less inclusive and almost sanitize the issue.
Yeah, all the clinical diagrams.
Yeah, absolutely. It's quite interesting, actually. I did my undergrad dissertation on representations of menstrual blood in adverts, so very on topic. And I remember when I was doing, I had like a focus group, and I was showing them videos, adverts of blood in like mouthwash adverts. You know, when you have like someone brushing their teeth and they spit and there's blood, or like plaster adverts, very similar. And then they saw the blue blood in the menstrual product advert, and they still couldn't really figure out what I was trying to say. And I was like, you can see blood there, but you can't see blood there. And just kind of the revelation on their faces, and they were like, oh yeah, like it's the same thing. But yeah, no, we love that video so much, and we've got it on our Instagram, so please go and check it out. So when you were developing that concept, did you want to kind of like actually make it a reality? Like, do you think that these plasters are something that can happen?
I really, really am trying to work on getting them together. I think the issue is, like anything which is slightly medical, you obviously want to make sure that it's safe for people to actually use as a plaster. If there's anyone out there watching this who knows any manufacturers who'd be happy to chat with me, I'd be really keen. Shameless plug there. But yeah, like it's so much so to the point where it was initially like a concept piece, and I pitched it at an award ceremony, and then a lot of people, including iRise, saw it through that award ceremony, and
yeah,
people have been asking me, where can I buy it? And I'm like, oh, I'm working on it. But yeah, I'm really glad that it was almost like past its mini test, and now I'm looking to put it out in the world.
yeah.
Maybe you can
the
find a
demand is
menstrual
there.
product manufacturer that might include them as samples inside menstrual products. That would be really nice.
Ooh, yeah, like
promote
one
them.
for you, one for someone important in your life who doesn't have periods.
Exactly, so they can feel included.
Yeah, and then it'd be quite a good way to teach kids about it as well for their first period.
Go ahead.
You know how a lot of NGOs basically have dignity kits that they basically like in which you have period underwear or just period products in general, booklets about information, towels. You could reach out to those NGOs and ask them if it's possible to include a sample of those plasters in addition in those dignity kits with a little like paper thing that explains the project, because I'm sure you can find someone that would like agree to that, because it's a fantastic way of engaging with kids as well.
No, you're so right, definitely. I think the hardest bit is literally making it and then outsourcing it. I feel like it's gonna pop, but
yeah, that definitely is the hardest part, because I was just thinking we would love to have that to give out to when we do like education classes and stuff. We have this incredible sort of period stigma worksheet for kids, and to have that and to have the plasters with it and kind of have that conversation with them could be so fun. So yeah, you've got the demand is there, we just need someone to like produce it.
Need a money person.
What you guys are doing at the Red Cloud Project. Maria, did you want to kind of give us a bit of background as to what is the Red Cloud Project, what are you guys doing, and also how you guys sort of came to be a team as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So it basically all started last year during Tate Exchange with, so I'm going to, Child Rights International Network, I'm going to call it CRIN throughout the podcast just to make it shorter, because that's also the name. So CRIN essentially collaborated with UEL group to basically run Tate Exchange, and all four of us, so we were in the same class, BA Graphic Design, we were like, yeah, let's do it together. And one of the things that we did during International Women's Day was basically a period talk. Safia specifically did it. And we really got angered by the news of a 21-year-old woman who a few months back had died in a chapaldi from smoke inhalation when she tried to lit a fire to keep warm. So chapaldi is basically a practice where the woman has to leave the house and go into what we call a period hut during the time where she's menstruating. So after we graduated from our course, we were approached to pilot the design fellowship program called Right Studio at CRIN, where graduates explore the intersection between art and activism. And we were like, what can we work on? And we remembered basically this period talk and the chapaldi, and we were like, we want to run with this. We want to focus and do research on this topic and kind of uncover the information around period stigma and poverty and the extent of its damage on a global scale. So the project is still ongoing. It's basically meant to be 6 months, but we're taking a bit more time. And the Red Cloud Project, which is the project that we're working on in the fellowship, is an educational book that is designed to break the shame and stigma around menstruation through so a book and also an interactive box. So in the book, you have chapters that include menstrual health, period products, period poverty, and dignified menstruation, breaking period myths, period positive myths, activists around the world, period activist interviews, period and religious interviews. So as you understand now, it's a gigantic book and it's over 300 pages. So we're splitting it up in different levels of ages from 11 to 13, 14 to 16, and 17 plus. So the aim of our project isn't to preach and tell people what to do, but we want to encourage conversation, sharing and informing as much as possible to clear up the myths around periods. So to avoid like regurgitating like the plethora of useful information that is already available out there by so many NGOs, we wanted to include as well reflective activities and exercises throughout the book to provoke conversation amongst everyone that is reading, including boys, as we don't want to impose our point of view. We basically are like, this is the info, here's some exercise for you to think about, you tell us what you think about the content. We don't tell you what to think. So in addition to that, we have a bunch of crowdsourced stories from around the world in order to share experiences of other folks out there. And there's a mix of positive stories, harrowing stories, and Sophia will go in detail about that later on. And this is meant to highlight the importance of sharing experiences of all backgrounds around menstruation in order to connect us all. And then Anna will talk further about the period cloud. Yeah, so
Can you give us some
that's the intro.
examples of those activities that you mentioned, Maria?
Absolutely. So one of them is, so at one point we talk about shame, and we basically explain the difference between shame and guilt. And Sophia will explain that later on. But the idea is we basically wanted to create a scenario that is, imagine you are in class and you suddenly bleed, you don't have a pad, and there's blood all over your uniform, and your crush is behind you. And we basically wanted to give like a scenario, like a horrible nightmare scenario, and have the reader kind of almost confront it and write, like, there's questions like, what would you do if that happened? How, if this happened to a friend, what would you do to help? And other exercises like write a letter to your younger self now that you're older, about, you know, talking to your younger self about your expectations of periods when you were younger, or write a letter to your older self, because we also talk about, for example, menopause and other like stuff that happens when you're older, and we wanted the reader, if they're younger, for example, to think about those in advance so that they can write a letter to their older self and then read it out again a few years later and see how they've changed. And then at the end of each chapter, there's something called a question corner, where we basically ask questions like, so what do you think about myths? Why do you think we create myths around periods? Have you heard of myths in your culture? Or do you know any positive stories in your culture about like menstruation that represents menstruation in a good way? And there's finally another one like inventions. We talk about period products and how they were made in history. And we asked them, if you were to create a period product right now or something to help girls that are menstruating, what would you do? And yeah, that's the kind of examples we've got.
I love how you are putting the menopause in that vision. Menopause is something that a lot of us are going to go through, and I feel like it's so highly stigmatized. Just in general, older women are highly stigmatized as being sort of not useful in society, and all of those horrible negative connotations. And so I think it's so important that we start talking about that now, even though we're not maybe there yet, to understand what that experience is going to be like, because it's the same as when you go through puberty. You want to know what's happening, you want to know what's going on, you want to feel prepared. And I think that's a kind of a new thing that's coming into period advocacy now, is this inclusion of menopause. So yeah, I just wanted to say I love that part of it. I think that's amazing.
And I want to add to what I said last week, and when I had a moment I couldn't remember, it was Rachel Weiss, who I met, who founded the Menopause Cafe, who I wanted to shout out to, but in the moment of the panic of the podcast, I could not remember her name.
Amazing,
so I wanted to correct that today, to give her the credit she deserves. She's a fantastic person. I had the pleasure of meeting her a few months ago, and she told me all about the Menopause Cafe, and it seems to be going from strength to strength.
Amazing.
Where is this cafe? Is it in the UK, the cafe?
So I think people can host it all over the UK. So I think you can take part in them in lots of different cities. It's just an opportunity for people just to talk about menopause, really.
So is it more like a concept than an actual place?
Yes.
Like something that you can take. Okay. That's really cool.
So you can host your own menopause cafes, I think. And I think Rachel has all the literature about it. But you can go on their website, which is menopausecafe.net, I think. And you'll find more information about it there. But it's really fantastic. Like, we definitely need to start more conversations around the menopause. Because again, 100%. It's something that's surrounded by a lot of pejorative stereotypes, such as menopausal women as old or dry or just withered, not sexually attractive anymore. Exactly. As part of my PhD, I also looked at representations of the menopause as well, and there's a lot of similarity there. But again, it's even more taboo because it's the aging woman. And in society that valorizes women and their fertility, then clearly menopause is even more of a taboo subject than periods, because at least periods are a sign of fertility.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh yeah, we talk about infertility as well. We have entire chapter talking about infertility, how it comes about, and also making sure that people understand infertility isn't just, you know, women as well, it's also men. And we basically point out that this has nothing to do with femininity, and make sure to like create that opposition. Like femininity is not the same thing as fertility. They are completely irrelevant. And same for menstruation.
Yeah, incredible. Thank you. Also, I was thinking when you were saying that thing about older women, when I was younger, I was like so frustrating how there's this concept of like the sexy, like older male, you know, the grey silver fox, is it? Silver fox.
Like
and women just didn't have that same thing, and it was so frustrating. Yeah, exactly. And I'm like, why not? Why can't we have like the Helen Mirren type, you know? Something like that.
Well, look how amazing Jane Fonda is.
Yeah, that's true.
But
okay,
yeah,
thank you.
An example of that, Akushla, is the fact that, you know, a single man is a bachelor, which has a lot of positive connotations, whereas a single older woman is a spinster.
Yes, yeah.
Patriarchal language again.
Oh, it's very frustrating.
I could go on about it for hours, and I think my students are bored of me ranting on about it in my lectures, but they need to learn.
That's what these podcasts are for, where we can rant about these things.
Exactly.
So thank you so much, Maria, for kind of introducing what your book is about, what your project is about. Do we want to then go on to Bristy? Did you want to talk a little bit about period poverty, breaking taboos and stigma, your sort of involvement in the project?
Mm-hmm. So we have many chapters, as Maria said. I focus on the period poverty chapter. So period poverty is many things. It's the lack of access to menstrual products, menstrual education, but also the lack of toilets, hand wash facilities, and waste management. So not having access to a safe and hygiene way to deal with your period can lead to serious consequences, especially in a girl's education, as the lack of menstrual hygiene management can leave a girl without a safe and private toilet, especially in school. And this leads to a girl missing school during a period. And if she misses school every time she has a period, that can set her back about 145 days from her fellow classmates. Now, her missing school can lead to her dropping out of school altogether. And without that higher education, it puts her at greater risk of child marriage and having pregnancies at a early age. And since most girls get their information on periods from their mothers, if the mother herself hasn't had a good menstrual education, it only exaggerates the taboos and the myths around periods.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just wondering, is there kind of a certain like geographical or cultural context in which you're talking about this, or is this kind of a global perspective?
So when I originally started my research, I focused on South Africa and in Asia as well. But as we've gone on with the project of this 6-month-long journey, I've also looked into like Western countries, so the UK and the US, where they also have issues with education on menstruation, because I think my education on menstruation itself was very poor. So yeah, and I think, as you mentioned before, like adverts, when we were using demonstrations for blood, we used water. We just stuck a tampon into a cup of water, and that was it, apparently. But yeah, so myths themselves are usually based on superstitions, and some are intended to protect girls. We interviewed a Hindu scholar, Natasha Chawla, and she explained how back in the day when women didn't have products to manage their periods, they were told to stay out the kitchen because it was unhygienic to prepare food whilst they were bleeding everywhere. But obviously today we don't have that issue. Well, in some places, we are able to prepare food hygienically. But I think it's these types of thinking that has created myths like entering the kitchen or cooking during your period will contaminate the food, which also brings back to myths like period blood is dirty, and if you leak, you're dirty as well. Which, as I think this was last year, a Kenyan girl, she sadly committed suicide after she leaked during her class, and both the teacher and her fellow students called her dirty. And I think that's been a vessel of period shaming for centuries.
Yeah, and I think that when people ask me sort of why I'm interested in these kind of conversations, one of the reasons is when I was at primary school, I remember there being a story about a young girl from the UK who unfortunately did the same thing. She ended her life because she thought that she was dying and she didn't want to be a burden on her family. And I think it's really important to remember that those horrible cases are not within one certain society and one certain community. It's a global stigma that we all experience, and sometimes that comes about in different ways, but just from that really sad story you can see how that can happen to any of us. So when you're talking about taboos and stigma, do you kind of have activities in which you get people to sort of dismantle them and break them down, or do you just kind of provide the stigma and the taboos and say, what do you think? Do you think this is right? Do you think this is wrong? Like, how do you kind of have that conversation?
So we have an activity on that section. I think it's like two truths and one lie. So we try to make it a bit more fun, but we've given them examples of all the myths, but then we've also counted them. So these are the myths. So one of them would be less harmful myths. Let's say is don't have icy food whilst you're on your period, which having cold food during your period doesn't affect you at all. Some of us know that, but in some cases that is the case. There are also other myths like you shouldn't bathe whilst you're on your period because it can cause infertility, but the amount of water that touches your body or the heat of water doesn't affect your flow. It won't cause you any infection for your period, but in some cultures that is believed.
Amazing, thank you.
No worries.
Brilliant.
So we also interviewed Dr. Haifa, who is a gynecologist, and she went on to the topic of how period blood isn't dirty, it's just tissue. But however, that doesn't mean we should eat or drink period blood, obviously, but it doesn't make it any less dirtier than if you were to bleed with, like, say, on your hand, which I think is what Sophia's project with the period plasters dwells on really well. So I'm really looking forward to that project going through.
Yeah, me too. Amazing.
Yeah, so I think the lack of education on menstrual education is what has led some of these like myths coming about, and it really does affect like the shame and stigma around the topic.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. Did anyone else want to kind of chip in on sort of taboos and stigma in relation to the book, or just in general? Is there anything anyone wants to say? Just making sure everyone's got the chance. No?
I think Maria looks like she wants to speak.
Sorry, I was also if any because it's just basically to say that that as Brissy said, I think the thing that's really important to understand, I just want to hammer down the point that she already explained, just this idea that the fact that myths originally have as an intent to protect, it's so interesting to understand that originally, like, for example, if your mom tells you, don't go outside, you're on your period, this can be dangerous, it still is an intent of protection, but unfortunately the perspective is skewed to the point where it leads to basically oppressive measures. And it's just, I think that was the moment that was most interesting for us when we explored this topic, is we didn't realize that it could have, that originally it was for a good intention. And this is touched upon, Sophia will talk about it in a sec, where she will talk about how like these myths are intertwined both with culture but also with religion, and that these superstitions and prescription come from a very specific like area, and also understanding that when it comes to using these myths, in order to differentiate whether or not they are dangerous, you have to think, hang on, is this myth trying to protect me or trying to protect me from society? And if the myth is trying to protect you from society, that's bad. That's terrible, because it's basically telling you to shut up and sit down, and it's literally oppressing you in order to stay in order to separate you from society. However, if the myth is meant to protect you, then it still is a problem, but at least you understand the intention where it's from, and it makes it easier to kind of like fight against it when you know that the myth is meant to protect you, you know, from everybody else, and then you realize, oh, actually that's silly, I can just go outside, as opposed to the entire community telling you that you have to stay home because they're trying to protect everybody else from you. So yeah,
that's so interesting.
That's a great point.
Yeah, I think like this idea of sort of being protected, it often comes from such like patriarchal views of women need to be, we're special and we're precious, you know, like we need this kind of bubble around us at all times.
We need to be contained.
And when you were saying, just thought, I know that some of the work that we do in Uganda with taboos and myths, one of the really horrible taboos is that some young girls are taught by older men that if they have intercourse, they have sex, then that will reduce their period cramps and period pains. This isn't actually proven. And so I feel like there's this time where we have these taboos and myths which are protecting. We also have these taboos and myths which are heavily patriarchal and heavily twisted and dark as well. And they're so dangerous. So yeah, it's just so important that we have this space where we can say, these are the facts. You will. And yeah, I think that's amazing. Thank you so much for putting that in.
Just one last thing, making sure to say as well that this is international. It's not fixed to one area in the world. Like period poverty, stigma, everybody has a shape or form of it. And just
absolutely, it just manifests itself in different ways. It's just influenced by each culture, each religious belief. So we all have this kind of stigma, as you say, is common around the world, but it kind of it manifests itself in lots of different ways. And we have to like make sure that when we are talking about periods, when we're talking to different people, that we're respectful, of course, of their different religious and kind of like cultural identities as well, and making sure we understand how this influences their perceptions. And this is what I'm hoping to do when I do focus groups in schools. I'm trying to make sure I have a diverse group of young people that I speak with, and I'm going to be taking this what we call intersectional perspective on menstruation.
Yeah, it is so important to do that. I think also kind of recognizing that moment when you realize that we're very similar in our experiences of shame and embarrassment, although as you say they manifest, especially within the kind of period equality movement. It's something that does bring us all together, and does unite people to say, okay, you may be from a completely different background to me, but I also experience that shame or guilt or whatever it is, which can be really powerful. So Sophia, did you want to talk a bit about that shame guilt perspective?
So I think shame and guilt are two terms that are quite commonly used interchangeably, but they're quite different. So shame is a negative emotion resulting from an awareness of having done something dishonorable or wrong, and that makes you feel like your whole self is dishonorable or wrong, or you can regret an aspect of who you are as a person. So like, for example, if we use the example of menstrual leakage, like you don't only see the activity of leaking as shameful or less than, but the person who is leaked is seen or treated as less than. So the act is extended to associate the whole person. So when you period shame someone, you're basically saying you are menstruating, therefore you are gross, which doesn't make sense because you can't control your period. And, you know, it's just it's a natural biological thing. So as Maria mentioned, like within our book, we wanted to explore this kind of concept and idea of religion and culture, which are usually really closely interlinked, and they are very influential on how people view things. And unfortunately, a lot of the taboos and prescriptions used by people in order to shame and stigmatize periods are done so in the name of religion. So we wanted to speak to religious scholars to kind of ask them, like, what does your religion say about menstruation, to kind of break the shame and stigma around it, like through a theological lens. So Maria, this links back to when you were speaking about the patriarchal idea of menstruation, because like menstruation affects like 50% of the world's population, yet within most religions it is just either not spoken about or it is spoken about quite negatively. And so basically we also interviewed Father Jonathan from St. Mary Abbott's Church, and when we asked him why isn't there much writing about menstruation in the Bible, he said, quote, "So Paul is writing most of the New Testament letters. He is single and doesn't have a wife. Throughout Christian history, there are people who are literate are often monks and holy men, and often on their own. So it's not surprising that they're not writing about women, and particularly about things that women are keeping or forced to keep hidden from them." So that actually, it made, in a way, it was like it's not spoken about because like almost all religious texts are written by men. But in the book, we wanted to focus on areas where menstruation is viewed positively or explored positively within religion. So I'm going to quote a few examples from the interviews that we have conducted. Within Judaism, we interviewed Rabbi Sybil from West London Synagogue. And she said, most people think that when a woman is menstruating, she cannot touch the Torah scroll, the holiest object. Absolute rubbish. The Torah is not defiled by a woman's touch. In fact, the same word used for a woman who is menstruating is used to define a holy object, tameh. Which I was like, that's so interesting. It's like you use this same word, to define a holy object as menstruation. So I was like, that's cool. Then for Hinduism, we interviewed Dr. Lydia, who is a senior lecturer in Sanskrit at SOAS. And she informed us that there's a temple called Kamakhya in Assam, where it's thought that is where the goddess's vulva resides. So that is where she menstruates, and practitioners might go there to worship the menstruation of the goddess. And I was like, I had no idea about these really interesting things. Avni Chagh, who is a Hindu studies scholar, she told us that one idea around menstruation is self-purification, that only the woman has the privilege of experiencing, and therefore she doesn't need to partake in particular devotional rites when she's experiencing this kind of self-purification. So she's kind of resetting her physical and mental well-being. And then within Islam, we interviewed Imam Arij, who is an imam and a teacher within in Toronto. And he, as a teacher, he said they teach menstruation within his Islamic school, which was really interesting because he said it's taught within the school in an Islamic perspective, but it's spoken about. So he said, there is an example of the wife of the Prophet Aisha, who is titled the Mother of Believers. There are very beautiful descriptions of how the Prophet is lying on her lap when she's on her period, and the Prophet is reciting the Quran, holy book. She explained to her students that the Prophet would be just as loving and romantic with her when she's on her period, because a woman menstruating does not mean that she's any lesser. And he also added that if a culture is shaming women for something that the Prophet has said is a natural thing, something that the Quran has said is a natural thing, and it's a painful process, meaning that empathy is required here, not shaming, that is unacceptable. And we met Dr. Haifa earlier, who is an OBGYN and Islamic scholar, and she was talking about praying during your period, and she said, the beauty of Islam is that the act of worship in Islam is not linear. So if you cannot do this in a certain way, it does not mean I'm less or disconnected. So there's a long list of things I can read to still be connected to Allah. It's just the action of praying I'm not allowed to do. The connection with Allah doesn't stop during menstruation. It's just the way we connect changes. And so yeah, those are a few of the really positive things that we got to learn about, and we got a lot of contextual kind of knowledge and history behind why certain things are said. But yeah, those are a few things that we picked out from the interviews.
That was incredible. Thank you.
Yeah, that's so amazing. I think it's wonderful how instead of kind of taking the negative things and deconstructing them and focusing on that negative, you're looking at the positives within religions and actually thinking, we don't have to look at it that way. We can look at it this way, and it's here and it's true. And yeah, I think that's wonderful. And I also think it's really important to put out that within kind of our period poverty and menstrual movement, especially in the UK, to have people from different backgrounds, different religions, different cultures is so important, because I feel like previously a lot of kind of the period positive movement in the UK has been predominantly white, and I think that through the inclusion of other people from different cultures and religions, young girls can see people who look like them, who have similar practices to them, and are able to see, oh, she can do this, I can do it too. That's something that we massively experienced in we did a project in some schools in South London, and the community there was predominantly Muslim, and I was leading on this project, and I'm not Muslim, and luckily we had a volunteer there who was, and just to see the way that the young girls would interact with this person who was like them and could understand exactly what they go through was so special and it was so important. And I think like from that, we as kind of our organisation realised how incredibly important this sort of diversity and inclusive aspect is, because young girls need to have someone who is like them, and they feel comfortable talking about. Of course, I know somewhat about Islam and menstruation and religious context, but I don't know the experience of what that person goes through and what that person does day to day, the same as someone who identifies as that does. And so yeah, I love that you're kind of bringing in all of these different kind of contexts from different places and different religions, to kind of give this overall perspective. I think it's really powerful and yeah, amazing. So thank you so much for sharing all of that.
Thank you.
And then if we want to talk to Anna now, apparently you do like period product sort of stuff, and positive myths and focusing on like the positives of periods. So do you want to talk to us a little bit about that?
Yes, so I mainly focus on the period period product chapter, where we introduce different disposable and reusable products available, as well as the history behind products and also information on hygiene management. And on top of these, we made links back to the period poverty chapter by expanding more on the cost of products being one of the major factors causing period poverty. And we discussed specific cost-related issues, for example, sanitary products being taxed, sometimes even as a luxury item, and also touch on the topic of gender inequality by mentioning the free distribution of condoms in many countries, while that's often not the case for sanitary products. And in the same chapter, we also discussed the relationship between period products and sustainability, because from our research, we understood that using disposable products actually is a relatively more hygienic option, since you dispose of it after like each use, single use. But the issue here is that most pads and tampons contain plastic. And because many areas of the world, especially in the global south, don't have a proper disposal system, so the waste then goes towards landfill. And in some countries, like we learned that sanitary waste is buried or incinerated by the menstruators themselves. So this was sort of an example that definitely allowed us to realize how privileged of an environment we live in to be able to have bins like inside the bathroom cubicles, and also sink to wash your hands, etc. So going back as a way to communicate the importance of environmental awareness, and also to share a more affordable product option in engaging ways, we ended this chapter with a simple tutorial on how to make a reusable pad with materials you can find at home. And another subchapter is called Period is Your Power, where we share stories, positive stories from around the world in which periods are represented in positive ways, whether that's in the form of like mythology or like factual stories. So, for example, in ancient Hawaii, women were told to be in their most sacred state when they were on their period, and even have like spiritual powers that can suck out the soul of men. And in the Beng tribe of the Ivory Coast, a religious leader described the period as the flower of the fruit tree. So we all felt that when discussing period poverty and stigma and misconceptions, the topic can get quite dark. So by introducing these positive stories, we wanted to highlight more on the positives, so that we can fight against the negative misrepresentations. And one particular discovery we made was that because menstruation was often portrayed as being sacred and powerful and invincible in many of these stories from back in the olden days, this sort of generated this like skewed fear factor amongst people, especially amongst men. And this actually might be one of the causes of why even today myths are described as how myths describe period as something destructive, as Christy mentioned earlier. So it was very interesting and almost like enlightening to understand the origins of these negative period myths.
Amazing, thank you. You can already tell like how incredible this book is going to be. It's going to be such an amazing resource, because I feel like I've learned so much from you guys just within this conversation, and the fact that this information is going to be accessible to younger people as well. That's really important, because I don't know if Maria Tomlinson, you kind of feel the same, but I feel like sometimes a lot of menstrual conversation in academia doesn't then get broken down for other people to kind of access, and I feel like you guys are really winning on that, which is amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. There are so many academic studies about menstruation, and there have been for decades. I mean, there's even studies going back to the 1970s by feminists written then, such as the second wave feminists, who were like quite active in France. But yeah, I think it's so important as academics that we make sure that what we do isn't just published in academic journals, that we're not just researching in a vacuum, because what's the point? And that's why I was so keen to do this research I'm doing now, because, being part of this podcast, for example, I wanted to do something that had a positive impact on society. And I think the way in which we can do that best is to normalize talking about periods as much as possible. And I feel that the more we talk about it openly on podcasts, on television, in cinema, just everywhere, the more normal it become. And the more normal it is, the more comfortable people will feel about talking about periods. And I think the media can play a great role in kind of reinforcing the idea that it's a totally normal thing and we should talk about it.
Yeah, definitely. Also, just to mention, Maria's working on this piece at the moment where she's looking at period memes and kind of like what they mean, like on Facebook and Instagram and stuff, which I think is going to be so cool. So you should definitely read it.
I just finished writing the article last week.
Oh, did you? Well done.
So it will be going off to the journal for review soon. But I basically look at there are very few studies about periods and social media, but I found a great one from 2013 about tweets. And it said that of the thousands of tweets, this person said that of the thousands of tweets they collected, not one of them challenged negative ideas about periods. A vast majority of them just reinforced them. Whereas after I looked at all these memes, I found out that there were a good number, I think about 50 out of the 220 I looked at, that actually sought to challenge norms. Like, for example, one of them, which I really liked, it said that smuggling pads to the bathroom was a form of patriarchy. It's the most kind of like really aggressive kind of like, I can't remember the word that the meme was used, but like acceptance of kind of patriarchal ideas. And I think tweets and memes like are really important, because if you see something like that, you're like, oh yeah, of course. Why am I hiding my pad on the way to the bathroom? That's really silly. Like, why am I ashamed? And there was a few memes that kind of reinforce stigma. So there was one about that said, dear product manufacturers, could you please make your products quieter so no one knows in the bathroom that I'm on my period? And that is just reinforcing ideas of secrecy and shame. Where there was another one opposite to that had an image of Katniss from the Hunger Games holding her hand up like that in solidarity, and it said, when I hear someone changing their pad in the bathroom. And that was kind of showing a sense of like female solidarity. So I think the language around periods is changing, and there is definitely more positive language being used on social media than there has been in the past. But there's still obviously a long way to go, because most of these memes still kind of reiterated negative patriarchal ideas about periods, such as women being crazy or like over emotional. I mean, some of them are really, really funny, but it doesn't mean they're not kind of stigmatizing menstruation still.
Yeah, definitely. I'm really looking forward to reading it. I think it's going to be really cool.
I hope so. Hopefully the journal will like it, but they've selected it for the special issue.
Well, I will like it if the journal doesn't, so it's fine. Perfect. And so, other Maria, did you want to talk a bit about the outreach that you did for the book and like how you got feedback on it and that sort of thing?
Absolutely. Thank you. Actually, great transition as well, because it goes back into all of this discussion on like having inclusive anyways, moving on, just cut that out. So basically so when it comes to the outreach of the book, so that includes all the feedback that we've received both from like NGOs, children, and just our strategy in being able to disseminate it as effectively as possible, we took into account various things. So first of all, as I mentioned previously, all the stuff we talk about we're putting it in the preface, and I'm saying it now in the podcast. We're not experts. We are 4 designers that did the research and did our best to basically use our specific design skills, which includes like, you know, empathy and all that jazz and communication and language, in order to effectively convey the message. That's our main aim, as I mentioned previously, is that we basically the way we gathered all of our content and our expertise is by reaching out to other experts. So basically, all of the stuff that you'll see in our book comes from existing leaflets, existing resources directly given to us by different NGOs, or we've researched directly on their websites, with which we then redesigned, edited, and then had it again peer reviewed by more experts. So some of the experts that we've listened to are like Days for Girls, Crin, Radha Powdell, the Radha Powdell, the founder of Global South Coalition for Dignified Menstruation, Dr. Haifa, Dr. Lydia, and a bunch of nurses, medical students, and more resources like UNICEF, WaterAid, Dr. Marnie Summer, Goonj, Body Good Period, and ActionAid. So as designers, we basically took all that info and made it as accessible as possible through one, making all the content and the language as accessible as possible, because obviously our audience is children, so anyone under 18, between 11 and 17, therefore making the language simple but also easily translatable, because one of our strategies is to be able to translate this book in as many languages as possible in order to have it as accessible in as many places as possible. Another way is obviously making sure that the language isn't patronizing or condescending. Be mindful of gendered language as well when talking specifically about gender and menstruation, which is a chapter we address directly in the book. Making sure that the information about, for example, menstruation and disability, or menstruation and homelessness, menstruation and refugees and asylum seekers, all of that language is used in a way that is nuanced, that doesn't fall into like specific imagery or cliches, and taking into account as well that since we're basically mentioning specific issues, we don't want to like link those specific issues to like specific types of people or specific areas of the world. Obviously make it where the relevancy, like create the relevancy where it has to be, but without saying, for example, oh, let's talk about period poverty and only talk about South Asia and Africa. So that is our main focus, yes, obviously for like the dissemination strategy, but we also basically say, hold up, just because we talk about poverty, I know that you're already making the links here with lots of specific communities, but this is also in the UK, in the US, in France, in Spain, in lots of areas in the world. So be mindful in that type of language as well, and also visually in terms of use of color. So in the book, we basically color coded all of our pages depending on the level, and we made sure to use fonts and combinations of colors that were basically easy for people who have, for example, dyslexia or other vision issues. Like Saf, specifically Safia, focused on that area a lot with Bristy. They basically made sure that when it came to use of color from the text to the page, that the clashing of colors was appropriate for people that might have vision issues or dyslexia. And also, no, that's my point. And then when it came to getting the feedback, so because this is specifically, you know, for children, we had to make sure that we're adults. We can't just pretend, you know, that we know exactly how they will read it and how they'll take it into account and whether or not it's good. So the most important things as designers that we were taught is empathy and the importance of feedback. You have to test this with your audience. So we've been sharing it as much as possible to as many children as possible, but specifically children that are from all different backgrounds. It can't be, you know, like just one group of girls specifically in the UK or something. So we're trying to reach out as much as possible in order to get as much feedback as possible, specifically when we're talking about areas that they are from. And one of the most interesting thing was children are very, very honest in their feedback. They're not all of them, but when they are negative, oh my God, they are brutal. And they basically tell you if something is boring, patronizing, annoying, or just plain like, you know, annoying. So because they're so specific, it basically meant that we had to like swallow our pride as designers and take it all in account and understand basically where they're coming from, and take in the feedback in account little by little in the book. And in addition to that, because we don't want to like force any opinion and information down their throat and stuff, which is the reason why we have all the exercises and the reflective stuff, we also like decided, you know what, because this is children, maybe one of the best way to reach out to them is to also go through other forms of media that is not just our book. So we have a chapter where we dedicated it to other forms of like media that talks about periods and menstruation, like books, films, articles, podcasts, comic books, because again, in terms of outreach, it's important that they understand that our book is just one resource out of many others, and that the only thing that makes our book relatively good, hopefully, I hope, is that it is designed, that it's pretty. I know this sounds superficial, but it's so important to have a leaflet that you actually want to read.
Yeah,
it's
it
so
needs to be
important
eye-catching.
Exactly, eye-catching, entertaining, illustrative, and just, you know, something that someone might pick up and keep for a while, hopefully. So our book includes so many, like, through the activist interviews, through the references to other activism around the world. We have an entire page called Let's Stand Up, where we tell them, we have an entire list of all, not all, but a lot of different NGOs and activists that are working on pro-poverty in all different countries around the world, with their email and the title, so that they can contact them in case they need it. So our book is really much that type of resource that we're looking for, using it as like a pad to, oh my god, using it as a way to basically reach out to even more sources to understand it even further.
And how are you planning on disseminating the book?
So the communication plan that we have is that, first of all, it will be free, both digitally and printed. So one of the ways of doing it is to take the PDF, put it onto a website that is also divided into different chapters of the book. So you know how we have like 9 different chapters, like menstrual health, period products and stuff. We're gonna basically hopefully divide that as specific tabs onto the website that has the specific PDF from the book that then people can just download in either color or black and white and have it as separate sheets, or they can alternatively download the entire like 3 booklet, or they can just access it online for free. And then hopefully we can try and partner up with like potential NGOs to whom we can give out the physical book that they can then hand out directly within their countries. Again, that's a hypothetical, that's hopefully. And also potentially do some kind of like launch or something in order to promote the book as much as possible, because our point again isn't profit, it's to give that book out to as many people as possible, and to hire translators to translate the content.
I was literally about to say you're going to be translating it.
Yeah, hopefully. I mean, again, we need to reach out to like more translators and find someone within budget, but that is definitely in the books, because it's so important, because otherwise, you know, we can only reach out to readers that speak English. At the moment, we're limited in our feedback, that we can only get feedback from children who speak English internationally, and that already defines a very specific kind of like background. And you know, and the thing is, that background isn't necessarily the background that is shared by all of the readers we're trying to reach to. So we have to be mindful that English is might be an international language, but it's still one language amongst so many others. Like some of the people we interview, for example, for activism interviews and other interviews, they like English isn't their like main language, and we'd realized like the amount of language barrier there was just trying to communicate via email. Well, like imagine somebody who tries to read the book who doesn't speak English, they're going to struggle, it's going to be horrible for them. So yeah, translation is very important for us.
Amazing. I was also thinking, when you were talking about the translation, have you thought about how you might maybe reach out to the deaf community as well, maybe having like it spoken, what's that called, like an audiobook, like that sort of thing?
Oh, a blind or deaf community? Sorry.
Blind. Sorry, I got them mixed up. Blind.
No, actually, that's a great point. We didn't think about that at all. So thank you so much for that.
No, that the reason that I bring it up is our last podcast we did on invisible disability and menstruation, and the person that we had on sort of spoke a bit about the deaf and blind community. I think it's so important to make sure that they're included within this as well. Yeah, but just a thought, basically. If you feel like reading out every single page, all 300 pages, then I'm sure someone would love to listen to it. Amazing. Thank you so much. And just for everyone who's like listening, if they want to kind of follow your journey and follow where the book is and what's happening, where should they go to?
At the moment, Instagram and the Crin website is where the information will be updated, but mainly our Instagram. We are yet to have a website. We will make one and we will update it on the Instagram. But at Red Cloud Project, you can find all of our updates.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And then I guess kind of the last part of this sort of period chat discussion, we just want to kind of talk about why young people should be using the media to become advocates themselves, and that they can. Did anyone kind of like want to chip in on that, on the sort of importance of using your voice and using the platforms that we have available?
Yeah, so I just wanted to say there's a misconception that activism is about having a loud voice. I'm a loud person, like I'm very aware of that, but actually so much of it, and especially what Ricebox Studio teach me a lot, is the importance of just having these conversations, educating yourself, and that in itself is such a powerful and actually quite a huge thing to do, because to go out of your way against the current of information you're already receiving, against a lot of stigmas that you're already dealing with, to then empower yourself through knowledge is in itself a form of activism. So whoever's listening, please don't feel like, oh my god, now I've got to design this big campaign or use my voice, or suddenly, you know, if you're just listening to a friend talk about their periods, if you suddenly talk to your brother or your dad, or find, you know, peace with speaking about periods within yourself, that in itself is a form of activism. And I really hope people take that away, because it's also about habit changing. And as Maria said many a time, we all designers, and as designers it is our job to try and bring that information in as accessible and unbiased a way as possible. And it's an interesting form of activism, because everybody thinks, oh, activism must mean like a strong political stance or having a big strong view about this. But the whole point about this podcast is that this should not be a controversial issue. This should just be an everyday conversation.
Yeah,
that's my two pence.
Yeah.
2 pence.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think
Wonderful.
that also, don't be, as you say, to like not be afraid of activism as a young person. You don't need to be an expert in a certain field to be passionate about something and want something to change. And even the experts in the field, we're all still learning. We're all still learning what is the appropriate language and how to be more inclusive, and it's a learning process for everyone. So don't be afraid to like get stuck in and get involved. And as you say, just something as simple as, I mean, I think if I was at school and I walked out with a tampon in my hand, I would feel like the bravest person in the whole class. And it seems like something that's so small, but if other people saw you do that, it's so powerful. So as
that
you
all
say,
adds to the visibility around periods.
Yeah, you don't have to be the loudest person or the person with the biggest following online or in person. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that.
I'm going to say a little bit about like using the different media. Like it's a really great. I think Maria mentioned a few campaigns that just like sharing your story. Like we used a lot of social media quite a bit to kind of gather our crowdsourced stories, where we did a call out for stories from like trans, non-binary people, spoke to people experiencing homelessness, and people with blood disorders. Like social media is a great way to just kind of reach out to people and gain new experiences and learn about menstruation within like different areas kind of thing. And there's also like really cool activists online as well. Like there's Amika George, the founder of Free Period, and Menstrupedia as well, which is like a comic towards
and Amika George started as a teenager as well.
Yeah,
so
and we were so lucky teenage audience. Yeah, I think she was quite young, and we were really lucky to interview her as well in the book. But there's also the PAD project, Period End of Sentence, and we interviewed Sophie Isham, who's one of the founders, and she explained when she spent evenings just Googling about the issue when she was 16. So you can just start small, and that would literally make a difference.
Yeah, amazing. The more voices, the better. Basically.
Exactly. And social media can be used to form a community as well. Hashtags can bring people together and form a menstrual community online of people sharing ideas and stories. And it kind of creates a sense of solidarity between menstruating people, which is really powerful.
Especially now, because everything is online now. We're all virtual all the time at the moment. Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. And then the last two sort of parts of our podcast, the first is we want to ask you as our guests whether you have sort of any period focused recommendations for our listeners to go to. So for example, like an Instagram or a YouTuber or a book. Is there anything that you think is particularly inspiring?
Shall we ask Sophia first?
Two. My first is Nat Byrne. She's an illustrator and her name is spelled Natbyrne. And she wrote a book called Period, and it looks a lot about trans and period experiences there and just spreads joy through her drawing. And then the second one is I've got it here. It's a little pouch, and it was called Emergency Pad Project by someone called Syra. And she studied at University of the Arts London, which is how all of us lot, Ricebox Studio, like know each other. And it's literally really, really beautiful card, like so, and a bit about endometriosis and what it is as a condition. Two lovely pink pads, and well, I ate the chocolate, but it was branded chocolate to like make you feel better. So yeah, really, really lovely.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And yeah, I know you have to go, so you'll feel free to drop out if you need to.
Yeah. What else is there? There's the red seat, isn't there? And then
yeah. So does anyone else have any recommendations at all?
Oh, the Menstrupedia, the comic. Oh my god, everyone, please buy it, read it, because it's so easy. Pad Man, fantastic Bollywood film about a man who created a machine to make pads. And also, Sophia, as a quick thing, a bit out of subject, but you know your emergency thing. Is it possible to reach out to them to ask them if they could collaborate with you for your plasters?
I could, but I think she's like doing a small-time student project as well. So it's
both in the same boat.
yeah. But good idea. Could do it anyway.
Amazing.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Any other recommendations? There's a good 3 there. Well, if you have any others, then just put them in at the end. And so the last thing we're going to do is basically our red seat. So it's kind of like the hot seat, but the period version. And so we're just going to ask you guys one kind of question about your menstrual experience. But obviously, if you don't want to answer the question, you absolutely don't have to. So the first question we have is, at what age and where did you get your first period? So does anyone feel like that's a question that they would like to answer? Yeah, Bristy?
Bristy.
So I was 13, almost 14. So my sister had actually started when she was 11. So when I started, everyone was really excited when I had mine. But it was actually this time 10 years ago. It was around Easter holidays. I know, it's come around.
You're so young, I'm so jealous.
I'm really sorry, guys. I've got to go now.
Oh, no worries.
Thank you so much for having me. And
Thank you so much, Sophia.
Thank you, Sophia.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Yeah, sorry, carry on, Bristy.
Yes. So I was quite lucky. I was at home when I first started. I woke up one morning, went to the loo, looked down, and there was just a little speck of blood. And I could hear my mum in the kitchen, so I called her over. She comes in, and I think she was a little too happy that I had started.
Oh.
But yeah, so she perked me up. I went to the living room, I laid down, and then about 5 minutes after, my dad comes into the room, pats me on the head, gives me a kiss on my forehead, and then just goes, "Don't worry, you'll be fine," and then just leaves.
Oh, bless him.
So yeah, I think luckily I had quite a good experience when I first started. So,
amazing.
Yeah,
Thank you for sharing that. And then the next question is, what is your preferred period product?
I don't mind saying this one.
Yeah, go for it.
I don't know. Okay. I might definitely the pad, because all the others. Not all the others. Period underwear looks really fun. I haven't tried that. The pad. The reason why not tampon or cup is because the insertion. It hurts, and if it doesn't hurt, it's just scary, and yeah. So that's why it's the pad.
Yeah, totally fair enough. I think also important to say that with insertion, that doesn't hurt for everyone. That's something that might be your experience, but it can also be done without pain, just to put that in there.
Absolutely.
But yeah, thank you.
We do actually mention it very fast in our book, the insertion taboo that a lot of cultures have, and in general, I cannot pronounce that word.
Vaginismus?
Yeah.
That's the one, guys. Yeah, and I probably have that when I try and put tampon in. So don't worry, guys. It's just me stressing out. Don't worry at all. Just relax when you put it in. Just relax.
Thank you. Sophia, did you want to share something? I felt like you were going to say something.
I was just gonna add, like, period product bags. Like, I've recently started using a reusable cloth, and it was like, because it was a really different experience from, like, I usually wear pads, and it's just like, when you finish, you sit down, you just rip it off, roll it up, and bin it. But it's like having a reusable pad, and then you have to wash it, and it was like that process of, like, you felt it heavy, like filling with water and like squeezing it out, and you actually see how much blood I was fascinated. I was like, whoa, and that's all for me. Like, I bought a menstrual cup, have not been able to put it in yet. I'm trying. It hurts as well for me, Maria. But like, I was just so fascinated. It was a different experience of like kind of feeling it, washing it, like wringing it out and seeing my blood come out. I was like, wow.
Yeah.
It's a way of being kind of like more in tune with your body.
Yeah. So I try to use more pads as well, especially because it's more sustainable. So I try to use more reusable especially when I'm at home. So, yeah.
Amazing, thank you.
Adding on to that really quickly, I actually started using a menstrual cup as well a couple months back, like 3 months back. And yeah, I didn't even know about menstrual cups until doing research for this project, research about period products. And yeah, it's a very like sustainable way to for your periods, but also like you don't have to change it for a very long time, so in that way it's very useful as well. But yeah, as Sophia mentioned, like at the beginning it was quite difficult. I struggled a bit as well, but it's something I think that you get used to it. I got used to it, and yeah, I just wanted to add that on.
That's very common. I think pretty much everybody struggles with menstrual cups at the beginning.
Definitely.
Yeah, definitely.
They are really difficult to use.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. And then the third question is, describe your period in one word.
PMS. I'm done.
Fair. Amazing, thank you. And then the fourth question is, oh, go ahead. What did you say?
No. Oh my god, no, I literally said humid. So
humid? No, please, like, share. That's amazing.
Would you like to elaborate?
It's just that basically I don't have an alarm. I should track my period. Everyone should track their period. Please do it. But I don't do it as well. So it's a surprise. And usually the surprise comes with humidity. That's how I know when I got my period. I run a completely nice pair of underwear because I sit in humidity and I'm like, is it humid down there? And then I realize I'm on my period. And this is humid for 7 days. Fantastic.
I love that word. I've never heard a period described as humid before.
No, me neither.
I'm
in
going to
all
start
my
using
research
that.
I've done, of the thousands of magazines and newspapers and social media I've read, I've not seen humid before. I like it.
Maybe that's just Maria's thing.
It also reminds me of being on holiday, so it has very positive connotations.
Yeah, true.
I miss being able to go abroad.
Thank you so much. And then the fourth question is, what is your best self-care tip? So what's something that you do when you're on your period? What makes you feel better? For me, it's hot water bottles.
I like doing my nails. I find doing my nails very therapeutic.
Nice.
So, like, I'll sit down and then I'll make them all, like, put a bit of glitter on it or something. But yeah, they're not done right now, but I find that really therapeutic to do.
Cool, thank you. Anyone else?
I like taking a hot bath. Maybe even put in some like bath salts or like some sort of like bath bomb or something, and just have like a nice relaxing time. Yeah.
Amazing, thank you. Anyone else?
Exercise, definitely some kind of like yoga or something. Oh my god, Saf, you were trying to talk. I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, I wasn't.
Okay, my bad. Exercise, but not like really intense, like oh my god, 100 squats or anything like like
just something gentle, like gentle movement.
Exactly, like gentle yoga, like gentle stretching, but definitely like standing up once in a while so that you're not constantly slumped can actually help like back pains and stuff. So definitely, if your muscles hurt, do a bit of yoga and then go in the bath and then do your nails.
Amazing, thank you. And then the last question is, can you give me a reason why we should love our periods?
I was thinking about this one, and I was like, one of the people that we interviewed, Natasha Chavla, she said that with education, like if you told all the girls, all people that menstruate, that this is something that half the population has gone through, and like all of humanity, like if you think how vast that is, all of humanity, half of all of humanity has experienced this, like that's a really powerful thing. That is something kind of like generationally is being passed down. It's a shared experience. And I think if you think about it in a kind of like a collective, like we're all in this together kind of thing, I think that's like quite a powerful, like a very, it's a nice way of thinking about it. Yeah,
that's so true actually, because I think like if I think back to like Tudor times or something, I can't really relate, but we've all had periods and they had periods then, so that's so true.
There are people doing research on periods during medieval times, and there's books published on that.
Yeah.
That's one thing that links us across the ages.
Exactly. If anything, like everything changes, but like menstruation from the birth of like Adam and Eve or whatever you believe, everyone's menstruating. So there you go.
We wouldn't be here without it.
Very
Exactly.
true.
Literally.
Amazing.
And I guess it's a conversation starter as well, isn't it? Because everybody has it. If you see another like person in the room, woman, trans, non-binary, anyone, you're like, I have your period. Interesting little icebreaker there in certain contexts.
Yeah, something that brings us together for sure.
Exactly.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Did anyone else have anything they want to add before we wrap up?
Thank you is what I would add.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you,
Amazing.
everybody.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, thank you so much. So that was the second Empower Period podcast. The first one was on menstruation and invisible disability. The next one I think is going to be on menstruation and gender and sexuality. So tune in for that. Thank you guys so much for joining us. I really appreciate having you here. It's so amazing to hear like your stories and to hear what you're doing with the book, and good luck with it. I hope it's incredible. I'm sure it will be.
It sounds like a wonderful project. I cannot wait to see it.
Yes, me too.
Thank you so much.
Definitely. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Exactly.
Okay.
Thank you for everything.
We good, Maria?